no further ado, Mr. Mark Morey, welcome.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Good to see you. We titled this talk, Putting the Edge Back into Education. And specifically, I think about the edge between the known and the unknown. That's the edge that I'm thinking of. What's the relationship between the known and the unknown and education? There's this expression called "is not innocent." Mm-hmm. So, for example, what temperature is this room set at? 70 degrees, 68 degrees?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So 68 degrees is not innocent. Mm-hmm. This lighting
Oh, I get what you're saying.
is not innocent.
Are you saying not innocent?
Not innocent, yeah. I'm going to start building kind of like an idea here. Mm-hmm. The floor and these chairs and the way they're aligned, and that I'm up here and you're there, is not innocent. Mm-hmm. The code stairs of riser to tread ratio is not innocent. All of these things enculturate us into something. Yeah, and it's just what it does. Culture happens. It's just what it does. The question is, are we aware of it or not? Are we aware of it or not? So what's the impact of living in a 70-degree room, 365, 24/7? Or the engagement of more and more and more and more and more and more media? Because it's cool media, and the media is evolving, like the pixel level and the depth of content and the creativity is like blows my mind. When you look at movies from the 70s, they're like really like, oh, what is this slow? I remember watching this movie recently, I was like, God, this is a long scene. It's like 2.5 minutes long of dialogue. Like that was like over like a minute and a half for me ago,
Well, it sounds to me there needs to be a balance, because it's not, there's good, and then there's good information out there, and we can choose to create a culture, because where are we without culture? But if the culture comes from above and does not have our best interest and our children's best interest at hand, so it's a consciousness raising that we need to have while we walk this walk. Because where would we be without this library?
Exactly. So I'm just creating a little tension in the room. Sometimes a question's better than an answer, right? It just creates some tension, some creative tension, So what drew me was two things I was saying. It was nature and people living close to nature, historically. And that even includes, older versions of our ancestors. It's not always like Amazonians or Lakota people, right? It's like, could be a fishing village in Scotland, for example. And what's going on in those places as a pattern? What's happening there intergenerationally? What are some of the routines and common practices and cultural values that you can see there, like a map? And then compare them to where we are today. And that gives us a clue about what might be a good guidance system to put some of today's unconscious designs into balance. So, for example, the data around media usage, which seems to be kind of a theme here, we know that media didn't exist before this like it does today. And the data is something like kids are experiencing 7.5 hours of screen time a day. 7.5 hours, and that because there's a lot of different options. It's not just TV anymore, right? It's laptops, it's computers, it's iPads, it's phones, it's iPods, and then it's everywhere else that you can get engaged with it too. So, what's the impact of that? Because that's from when I was a kid, that's 7 hours of something else gone. That's the actual time. That's the actual day. That's almost a full-time job, right? So one of the things we know is declining in relationship to that is actual time spent outside. So that's kind of like the thing I was heading towards. That's not innocent. And when you look at cultures, for example, right now one of the things to pay attention to is the loss of language in culture. Culture is embedded in its language, how it uses its words. So like artist, that who art thou is kind of slipping into the old English to where we don't really make the connection between the word artist and human being. Artist is actually very unique, different kind of people. They live in Topanga, but it's a thing, versus like it's all of us. And if we had that language piece still in the regular usage of our language, it would encourage all of us to be expressive. It would be part of our education design. Every aspect of what we did to raise our children, because we're raising human beings, would be expressing their self-expression and creativity and artistry in some capacity, versus cutting it out because it economically doesn't make sense. It's like one of those first things to go in a lot of places. And then the other thing that's kind of getting eclipsed is, outdoor time. That doesn't make economic sense either, so we need to cut back on that. So when language is lost in a culture, there's like blunt traumas that can come in. For example, a dominant culture can come into a less dominant culture with more technology and more something and usurp a lot of their ability to continue speaking their language. And religion can do that too, for example. They can replace it with religious language because they want to control how they express themselves into a different context. So they use the Bible as the language of choice, right? And now the culture is changing because the language is not religious, for example. And governments do that, and businesses do that, right? So it's very effective. But you could have a language in a place for 1,000 years. And what's cool about it is like people who live in a place, their language is of that place. It's like song, it's like music. Cultures have a kind of music, right? It's like, oh, that sounds African, or that sounds Asian, or that sounds, it's like it's from the bayou, or that sounds New England. Right? Language is exactly like that. It's an expression of the place, of the people. And often their language for themselves was of that place. We're the people of this place. All of their names keep translating back to that. It's only derogatory names that come from neighboring tribes that we tend to learn, right? But, the Iroquois, for example, of my neighborhood in the Northeast, their name for themselves was Ongwe Hongwe, which means, people of the Longhouse, people of this place here. How long does it take for that culture who lived in that place for thousands of years to lose their ability to speak it?
One generation?
25 years? 20? It's like literally turning the light on in this room relative to how long they've been there. There's no preparation for that. Just like when power goes out, it's just like, oh, geez, where's the matches? Anyone have a candle? I don't know where my such and such is. Like, you're just not prepared, right? But when language goes out, it's not innocent. Because all the values and the meaning of how we interpret life is also gone. That's how you get children on the Lakota reservation who are basically in a third world country framework. They're in like complete devastation. Their eyes are just like, I have no idea who I am. And they're living in their ancestral home place. They have no idea who they are. What are we losing that we're unaware of? Because we're also part of the human family. That's what I want to capture before it's gone. And if not that, the awareness of it and how to bring it back. So this word regenerative. I know that human beings are born of nature. Our culture is reciprocal with nature. If we are not building a whole value system around the very place we live, we die. We're not above it. We're just not above it. And it's cool to see people who live very simply in relationship to the natural world know this. For example, like this anthropologist who wants to learn about a certain ceremony that this Amazonian tribe runs every year, and it's an enormous feast. It's an enormous expression of abundance and health and feeding people, and it's a huge nutrition festival. You know, it's a gigantic festival, and it has a lot to do with the fish that they catch. And so he's following them around. Well, where do you get these fish? You know, how do you get it? And he explains that, you know, they use a temporary poison they put in the water, and fish come up in this stream, and they can collect a whole bunch at once. And it comes from a certain plant, you know. So he says, wow, that's pretty intense, you know. So they're following the leader, and the leader's walking, and he passes by this perfect river, you know, that they could do it, and it's the closest one to the community, and they keep going. And they, you know, after about an hour, they pass by another one, and you have to cross over this thing and keep going through this thing. And like this whole village people are coming on this long trek, and it's like 8-9 hours later, they're still going, you know. And eventually they come to this thing, and he says, like, ask the obvious question. Why did we walk all day long to go to this river? You know, and he said, well, for the last 8 years, those are the ones that we had gathered from. So they had this built in, and where did that get started? They don't even know. This is just what we do. You know, this is just what we do. It's built in. Because they get an automatic biofeedback if there isn't food, right? So that's part of our challenge here, is we don't get immediate feedback from if we had to live in Topanga, that'd be an awesome experiment. Just block the roads. Block the upper road, block the lower road. We actually have to live here for the next 100 years. How would our behaviors immediately have to start upgrading and changing, you know? Where would our resources come from? How would we mentor our children to the relevance of that? How would we increase our ability to get along with each other in that environment? It was just us right here. So one of the survival technologies that I came across in these nature-based cultures, specifically the Haudenosaunee of the Northeast, the Iroquois, is peacemaking as a survival skill. This is that image I painted earlier of if I'm going on a quest of regenerative culture, of ways of bringing yourself back into consciousness. There's going to be a little tension between being asleep and having lost something in a blink of an eye. Because you know the way it goes is there's the elders who have certain deep language knowledge. Blunt trauma happens, right? It could be war, could be exodus of some kind, you know, immigration, invasion, all sorts of different possibilities, famine. And then the next generation, the language is broken. They're not learning the language anymore, and they have pieces of it. They speak back to their parents in, let's say, English, but the parents speak to them in their native language. This is pretty common. And then the next generation, the grandchild, doesn't know any of the language, and they can't talk to each other. That's how quickly it happens. And then, maybe right there, or maybe the next generation, they don't even know they had a language. They don't even know that they lost the language. It's not part of the story that gets told. It just goes right back to the present moment of whatever's being facilitated. So that's what I call what we don't know, we don't know. And this conversation is the awakening to realizing what we don't know. And it's the hardest one. That's the hardest step to take. Awakening to what we don't have and don't know or might have lost already. And then from there, you know, it's a matter of courage and a matter of collective practice. So, you know, do we have the knowledge and power and intimacy of our ancestors when it comes to relationship to place? Yes or no? No. And we could say 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 200 years ago, 50 years ago, 20 years ago. Like, it's still a relative statement anywhere along that trajectory. And we don't even know how to learn that anymore if we wanted to. How do we learn that profoundly? Well, there's a few individuals who've kept these threads, right? who are learning from masters in certain areas and places. But it's not like we're sitting in a circle going, yeah, what are all the facets that we want to bring back? In the transition town movement, they call it reskilling. Who's aware of transition town? Anybody? Oh yeah, you should Google that one. Spend some time on YouTube on that one.
What is it?
It's called Transition Town Movement. And basically it's a community-based, I would say, ground-up initiative that is saying if we had to, if we cut off the top road and lower road of Topanga and we had to survive in a local economy, how would we do it? So, you've heard of local food, right? This would be like local everything. Local children, local, peacemaking, local medicine, local energy, local,
Water supply.
yeah, what else? Local everything. And it's not really, the intention is actually not to block the roads, but like the deliveries might just not come in for a day or two for various reasons, because there's destabilization of the bigger, broader systems. There's some, not just theory anymore, but there's some data that suggests that, oil is not going to be as plentiful as it used to be because it's not an infinite resource, just like trees aren't. So if we overuse it and deplete it from its stock, then it's gone and we can't continue maintaining the infrastructure that's built on it. It's called peak oil. And the data suggests that we're at that point in human history. There's like these graphs, oil field graphs, and there's a certain depletion of a natural resource. Ocean fisheries have those graphs too. And they're really important to study because they eventually end up impacting us even here in Topanga. And so people did research on these things and said, geez, even if the whole world's not paying attention to these graphs, let's just start seeding, these ideas so that we're not caught off guard 50 years from now. Because I'll be an old man or an old woman and I want my grandchildren to have a chance. So they start these things, and it's kind of like practice, right, in a lot of these places. And they realize that people aren't farming as much as they used to be, and people don't know where their food comes from as much as they used to, and they don't know how to work with things that aren't gasoline powered, like horse drafting, things like that. And even just how to work with chainsaws or work with saws or sharpen axes or things that are more manual powered. All those skills are kind of moving away as if we don't need them anymore. But the premise is coming back that we might actually want to keep that in our back pocket. Maybe. It's you learn a lot of good things anyway, because I have to sit with you and learn from you and watch you, how you grind that edge, and what are you going to teach me in the process of using my hands and learning to grind that edge, and you get in some old-fashioned wisdom transfer going on. The kind of stuff that's not happening on YouTube. Where you're sitting next to a person and they have to translate a physical knowledge skill to another person. And you have kind of wealth there. You have an embodied wealth. And that person becomes resourceful and useful to the people. So reskilling is what they call that. And they just work with lots and lots of things. Delmar basically went down a reskilling list of all the things he learned from that elder man who lives in Topanga. And I would put him on my number one place to visit if I were here for another few days. This person has an amazing list of basic human mechanical and local food-based skills. In New England, we talk about canning a lot, canning food, because that's how we make it through winter when we're not importing California food. And so canning is like a skill that has just started fading away because people say, well, we don't have to learn how to can anymore because we just go to the supermarket. And that was good as long as trucks bring me food. Someone said they did research, do you know that there's only about a day and a half worth of food in every supermarket? Day and a half. And, but otherwise we're fine, just keep going, right? But what we've discovered is there's little shocks that happen every once in a while. One of them being like Hurricane Katrina. Or in New England, it was Hurricane Irene. And it shut things down for like 7 days. Like, there's something like 45 bridges were destroyed in Vermont from that hurricane, which had been there for 100 years. these bridges. We had no preparation for that whatsoever. And everybody was wherever they were. And if you had 50 jars of stuff on your shelf, you were stoked. But it revealed to everybody, who did and who didn't. And what family lineages were old farmsteads that continued to mentor their children in that, who had animals, livestock, chickens, goats, who could walk to their neighbors, who knew their neighbors. All of these ways in which we survived for the last 150 years were so useful. If you had entered the era of disconnection and not communication and don't know your neighbors and buying your stuff at supermarkets, those people were freaking out. And all of a sudden it was kind of like the lower income people had all of the value and the higher income people who were more tech and car oriented were stuck. It was just a really instant example of the lights going off. And what is the definition of resilience? So all of this comes back to the beginning of this talk, which is the edge. Putting the edge back in education. And in this case, the edge is the unknown. How do we prepare our children for an unknown future? A future that is unfamiliar to us. And I'm not weighing in on good or bad. I'm just clear we're on a trajectory that if it's different from 25 years ago, it's going to be continuing to be different going forward. So the edge is this unknown future. It's going to be different. And so specific strategies might not be the best approach, but general strategies and values and principles are really good. So that's why nature and learning about nature and how nature as an ecology works is a great plan. It's like the ultimate workout gym for rebooting the human software system. It's the ultimate place to reboot. It's the origin of our ancestors' cultures, the ones that lasted 1,000 years. The competency it takes to function in our natural world will immediately translate to healthy, resilient culture building, especially if we have some mentoring going on in the mix of it. So what does that curriculum look like? I work for an organization called 8 Shields. And 8 Shields is in cooperation with Manzanita to bring a rebooting of the software system for human beings into that curriculum. I'm thinking about sending my daughter to California so she can have that experience. Not really. But it's like my fantasy, because of all the places I've been and all the things I've learned, that is an ideal scene to give, especially, not only children, but adolescents, that ability to test themselves in the natural world. It's what all these nature-based cultures are doing in terms of rites of passage. Why are they doing that? And how does the community form around them? So there's some really good community things that are happening. I went to the performance last night, and I said, okay, this community, if you drop rites of passage into this community, you drop some of these culture building tools in the community and nature connection, this is going to be a hotbed of creating some powerful nature-smart children. It's like match to Tinder here, This is a very exciting time and place, and so lucky to have Manzanita in this neighborhood. Wow. Even if you don't have kids, I would pour my heart into making that thing work. It's going to become a model, if it isn't already. So the curriculum is 8 Shields is the name, but we basically are looking at a well-rounded 8 approaches to relearning the natural world. And it includes understanding hazards. What are the things that can kill you, hurt you, harm others? And it builds a common sense. Builds common sense. Look before you touch. You don't have to tell kids, look before you touch, look before you touch, right? That's giving them information. In a mentoring model, they'll learn that through the study of hazards. The way we did when we were kids on unsupervised play. You learned that. If you always keep a child out of the tree and you always keep them safe, it's kind of like antibacterial soap. We end up teaching them something else, which is you don't know how to take care of yourself. We don't trust you. You're not capable. Stay safe, stay small, stay low, you need me around you. That's what happens. And it's innocent, or not innocent. It's, well-intended, except it has a consequence to it. So mentoring is actually taking, you can be a parent, a conscious parent, and mentor your child with these edge experiences, but it's really great to have someone else in the family mix be a mentor, because you have that attachment, unconditional love, parenting relationship with your child, and sometimes mentoring requires a little bit of detachment, So ideally, if you could create a village around your child, you'd have some mentors who are more like aunties and uncles, who have same value system, but, are a little less attached to them, at a certain level. For example, poison ivy or thorn or some sting or a risk they took, right? Gives them feedback. As a parent, I would be obligated to stop them if I could, But otherwise, I've seen kids, you say, in the Northeast, we have a lot of ice and snow and water, and so it's like you have to learn to read these things, or else you can be in a really gnarly situation, right? It could be 19 degrees outside, and you think the ice is thick and frozen, but there's a stream that flows under the ice, so it keeps it nice and thin. So if you're not aware of the waterways on the landscape in the non-winter months, and if you're not paying attention to the landscape and the trees that indicate water, you might just walk right across that section thinking it's thick. And if you plunge through that, and you're up to your waist in water, and you're a quarter mile or a half a mile from home, that's a really bad situation. Throw in one or two other factors like darkness or twisted ankle, or you're with someone who's 4 years old, you've got a problem. So common sense, right? Paying attention. Nature will teach you, right? And with a mentor, the edge can be appropriate, where you don't take care of them every step of the way, and the ice cracks and their foot goes through and their boot gets wet, and you're like, whoa, right? And you're like, I almost fell through, That's a great learning moment. That's a teachable moment. We want to have hundreds of those moments. We want that, because that's what they're going to bring to community. That's what they're going to bring to their life. They're going to have a kind of common sense and worldliness to themselves. And other forms of curriculum around curiosity, another shield. Curiosity and the unending, open-ended question, the endless book of nature. I'm never bored is the result. That's the person you want in your company, who's like the innovator, I am never bored. I am insatiable. The religion of the sacred open-ended question. I am a lifelong learner. That's one of our shields. Another one is tracking and pattern recognition. Tracking is like paying attention to disturbances, to sequences, to maps, colors, arrangements on the landscape, and recognizing that pattern and translating it into another time and place. And if there's a disturbance in the pattern, it pops out. That's when you can walk into a room and be like, oh, somebody's in here. And the 3-4 people around you say, how do you know that? You're like, I didn't leave that hat on that chair. I always leave my hat on the hook. Or the phone is off the hook. Or the cereal box is on its side. I always fold it up and put it in the, and then you look around and then your little brother is hiding around the counter and jumps out and says, boo, Right? Pattern recognition, it's like detective level observation. Anyone ever see that TV show Psych? No? All right. You should just watch one episode. It's another cool YouTube thing. But it's the kind of, the stuff like why you loved, I don't know, Sherlock Holmes, or what's another cool, detective thing? Columbo. What's another one?
Agatha Christie.
Encyclopedia Brown.
Encyclopedia Brown, yes, the books. Love those.
Nancy Drew.
Nancy Drew, right? It's like, don't you just love those things, right? It's like, I want to be like that, right? I want to be observant and piece together disparate pieces of information into a story that I couldn't have gotten otherwise without that skill set. That's cool, right? And so we call that tracking. And of course, it's not just about footprints at all. You know, you can do people tracking. Right? And people tracking is like essential for a human relationship. Oops, I'm upsetting you right now, you know? Or I'm authentic right now based on what I'm tracking in the room. Or, you know, I think we need to take a break right now and go to the bathroom. Or we should probably set up that community meeting and do a round of proactive peacemaking, because, you know, there's some things we need to handle. We've been letting that teenage thing go a little too far, and I think we need to address it. I've been tracking the teenagers of the community. Tracking. And then there's 5 more shields. I could talk all day long about these things, and there's many levels of depth to them. And what it does, though, is it creates a holistic curriculum for human potential, basically. And what's great about it is it's largely embodied. It's a largely embodied experience. And we call it not just nature connection, but deep nature connection, because there's a facilitated process with mentoring that takes place. So my relationship to nature connection, because of this, is totally inseparable from mentoring. Everything I know about nature is completely related to mentoring and the mentor and the mentoring moment. So when I go to share my experience of nature connection with another person, the mentor comes with me. And they're long gone. But internally, I carry the mentor with me. And how I learned was in a way that was not necessarily instruction, but pulling forth the passion and hunger and curiosity from the learner. That's how it was done for me. With a few timely resources to get the connection that I'm looking for. So that might be a field guide, you know. That might be some information. That might be another question. That might be a tool. That might be an imitation moment. Watch this, right? I'm struggling with this, and they say, watch this, and I go, oh, whoa, right? And I didn't tell them what to do. I just provided a resource at a timely moment because I knew they really wanted to get over that hump. I showed it one more time. And they're like, okay, you know, and then they put it into place, and it's their win. It's their win. And the best part about it is that, you know, it starts to create an intergenerational transfer. So if we have super knowledgeable people in place, and when they walk through nature, they have like a download of all the things that are going on around them. Just like, I don't know, name one of the competencies that you have here. Music, let's say, or what's another one?
Lizard catching.
Lizard catching? Are you a good lizard catcher?
My son is.
Okay, perfect. So, like, when, you know, well, these are different examples. Something not nature related.
A community-based competency?
Yeah, or anything. Any skill.
Play the piano.
Piano, what's another one?
Games.
Driving.
What?
Games.
Being funny.
Games? What kind of games?
Like video games.
Video games? Okay, what's another one?
Being funny.
Being funny. Yes. Okay, another one.
Fixing a motorcycle.
Fixing motorcycle. Okay.
Tolerance.
Tolerance. Nice. So, you know, there's a way in which certain people become experts in certain things. And I like to sometimes equate them with family lineages. So if you have a specialty in something, it's kind of a cool inquiry to say, did I get that from somewhere? You know, when no one's looking, you might want to ask that question, because I like to think I made it up myself, right? I am the sum total of everything I learned, and it all came from me, right? But as I get older, I humbly realize, well, actually, you know, if I just change the face of it a little bit, I did get this from my mom, and I got this piece from my dad, and actually there's, you know, 20 musicians in my extended family. I guess I could relate to why I'm a musician, you know, but none of them play jazz. So if we intentionally work with whatever resources we currently have in terms of nature connection and conscious culture building, certain competencies, and we put them all into one basket and we say, let's share these with each other with the intention of creating nature smart, regenerative smart children, and we team up together, they'll be raised, and perhaps their children will be raised in a community where that's the way it's always been. We can bring it back almost as fast as it's been lost, but we have to do it together. And we'll have to lean into that moment, of the edge, a little bit of the discomfort in that unknown, and trust each other. So today we formed a group of people who are going on a nature connection journey for the next 3 months, not only for themselves, but for the children at Manzanita and for the children they'll never know. Had that kind of intention to it today. So we'll see you again. Ken and I came down to support that group launching. And we're going to be back in May. We're actually going to put on, will the community be invited to that day? Yeah. So in May, like May 9th or so, May 10th, you could all come and play with us. And we're going to have people who are totally stoked to be doing these 8 shields with you and play all day long. And you'll have this vitality and joy coursing through your veins, and we're going to creating a community that deeply relearns these things. And it's going to be fun. So I'm at the end of my sharing with you, and bring my love for creation and health and love and people to this room and to this community so that we can all thrive.